The Georgia sun was already punishing by 7 in the morning, beating down on the asphalt parade ground at Fort Benning like it had a personal grudge. Private First Class Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the rifle range, his M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle resting across his forearm, watching the last of the brass casings from his final qualification round tumble into the dirt. He didn't celebrate. He didn't pump his fist. He just crouched down, picked up the casing, turned it over in his fingers for a moment, and slid it into his chest pocket. His instructor, Staff Sergeant Dale Pruitt, a compact man with sun-damaged skin and 22 years of Army service behind him, walked over slowly. He had seen thousands of shooters come through this range. He had seen naturals. He had seen grinders. He had seen men who looked like killers and shot like amateurs, and men who looked like accountants and could thread a needle at 900 meters. But what he had just witnessed with Ethan Cole was something he hadn't quite put a label on yet. "Son," Pruitt said, pulling the range scorecard from his clipboard and studying it one more time as if the numbers might change, "you just shot a perfect qualification score. Every target, every distance, including the 900-meter pop-up that's failed 70% of candidates this cycle." Cole nodded once. "I saw the wind shift off the range flag about 3 seconds before the target came up, adjusted 2 clicks left." Pruitt stared at him. "You adjusted before the target appeared?" "Yes, Sergeant." Pruitt scratched the back of his neck and said nothing for a long moment. Then he wrote something on the card, signed it, and handed Cole his qualification paperwork. "Report to your unit assignment office by 1400. You've been flagged for a Special Operations Support Attachment." Cole took the paperwork without expression. "Yes, Sergeant." What Cole didn't know in that moment, what no one told him, and what he would only understand weeks later when he was sitting in a briefing room surrounded by men who had done things that would never appear in any official record, was that his assignment wasn't random. Someone up the chain had reviewed his marksmanship data. Someone had noticed that his scores didn't just break the curve. They broke the chart. But in the world of special operations, paper scores meant almost nothing. What mattered was what a man did when the paper was gone, and the only thing between him and a catastrophic mistake was the steadiness of his own breath. 3 weeks later, Ethan Cole stepped off a military transport aircraft at a forward operating base in an undisclosed location in the Middle East. He was 22 years old. He had never been deployed. He had never fired a weapon at a human being. He carried his rifle case, his rucksack, and a quiet that most men his age hadn't yet learned how to wear. The base was a sprawling compound of hardened structures, satellite dishes, vehicle pools, and the constant mechanical groan of generators. Dust was everywhere, in the air, in the food, in the creases of every uniform. Cole checked in with the administrative sergeant, drew his bunk assignment, and made his way through the base to find the unit he'd been attached to. He found them in a corner bay of the operations building. 6 men, SEAL team operators from a unit whose official designation didn't match what was stenciled on their gear. They were the kind of men who moved through a room differently than everyone else, not louder, but heavier, as though the weight of the things they'd done pressed down through their boots into the floor. They were cleaning weapons, reviewing maps, and talking in the low, efficient shorthand of people who had worked together long enough that half their communication happened without words. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dawson, callsign Hound, looked up when Cole walked in. Dawson was 38 years old, built like someone had designed him specifically to move through hostile environments and not die. He had a jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown, and eyes the pale gray color of winter sky that assessed everything in fractions of seconds. "You Cole," Dawson said. "Yes, Chief." Dawson looked him over the way a mechanic looks at a new part, not dismissively but practically, checking tolerances. "Sniper attachment, Fort Benning, first deployment." "Yes, Chief." One of the other operators, a massive Hawaiian man everyone called Koa, didn't even look up from the suppressor he was cleaning. "A rookie," he said flatly, as though stating that the coffee had gone cold. Another operator, a wiry Texan named Reeves, leaned back in his chair and looked Cole up and down with barely concealed amusement. "No offense, son, but what exactly are they sending us here? You look like you should be at college orientation, not Overwatch on a direct action mission." Cole met his eyes and said nothing. That silence, not nervous, not angry, just steady, made Reeves blink. He wasn't sure what to do with someone his own age who didn't feel the need to fill the silence with something. Dawson pointed to an empty cot in the corner. "Stow your gear. Briefing at 0500 tomorrow. You're on Overwatch support. You watch, you report, you only engage on my direct order. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Chief." Cole moved to the cot, set down his gear in a precise and organized manner, and sat on the edge of the mattress. Around him, the operators went back to their conversations. The rookie was already forgotten, a background figure, support staff, a set of eyes on a ridge that would probably see nothing and report nothing and go home having fired 0 rounds in anger. That was what they believed. That was what almost everyone believed about Ethan Cole his entire life. His high school coaches believed it until his junior year. His college ROTC instructors believed it until he outshot their range champion on his first day. His Army superiors believed it until the scorecard came back. There was something about the way Cole existed in the world that made people underestimate him. A quietness, a stillness, an absence of the kind of loud self-promotion that most people use to signal their competence. He never told anyone what he was capable of. He saw no point in it. Capability, in Cole's private philosophy, was something you demonstrated when it was required and not a moment before. In 6 hours, he would sleep deeply and without dreams in a forward operating base, surrounded by some of the most lethal men the United States military had ever produced. In 36 hours, he would be lying alone on a rocky ridgeline in the dark, 800 meters from a hostile compound, with 10 armed men moving to kill his team. And in 36 hours and 18 minutes, no one on this base would ever think of Ethan Cole as just a rookie again. But right now, he pulled a worn paperback from his rucksack, lay back on the cot and started reading. Koa glanced over, saw the book and looked away. Reeves watched him for a moment longer, something flickering behind his eyes that he couldn't quite name. Dawson said nothing, but his gaze rested on the new man for just a second more than it needed to before he returned to his maps. The base settled into its nighttime rhythms. Generators hummed. Somewhere across the compound, a helicopter lifted off into the dark sky. Ethan Cole turned a page. The briefing room smelled like stale coffee and dry erase marker, the particular scent of every serious military planning session that had ever happened in every forward operating base in every conflict zone in modern American history. It was 0500, and the fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly in a way that would have driven most people to distraction. None of the men seated around the folding table seemed to notice it. They had long since made peace with discomfort in all its forms. Dawson stood at the head of the table with a laser pointer in one hand and a ceramic mug of black coffee in the other. Behind him, a satellite imagery printout had been pinned to a corkboard, a compound of low-profile buildings surrounded by rocky terrain, situated in a valley that the maps identified only by a grid coordinate, in a region that, officially speaking, American personnel were not operating in. "Listen carefully," Dawson said, and the room went immediately and completely silent. That was one of the things about elite operators that civilians who consumed military content never quite understood. The discipline wasn't just physical. These men could be loud and irreverent and profane in their downtime, but the moment an operation began to take shape, they became something else entirely. Alert, focused, quiet in a way that was almost spiritual. 48 hours ago, one of ours was taken, Dawson began. Captain Daniel Howe, Defense Intelligence Agency. He was traveling under civilian cover when his convoy was hit approximately 30 kilometers southeast of this position. His 2 security personnel were killed. Howe was taken alive. Based on signals intelligence collected in the last 12 hours, he is being held in the primary structure of this compound. The laser pointer circled a low rectangular building near the center of the satellite image. Enemy forces intend to move him across the border within 60 hours, possibly less. Once that happens, the intelligence he carries, and I'm talking about both what's in his head and what was on his person, becomes the property of a hostile state actor. That cannot happen. He let that land for a moment before continuing. The mission is a direct action extraction. We go in, we pull Howe, we come out. Timeline from insertion to extraction is 40 minutes maximum. We exceed that window, the risk profile becomes unacceptable. He clicked to the next image, a topographical overlay showing the valley's elevation features. Insertion will be by fast rope approximately 2 kilometers northwest of the compound. We move on foot to the target, breach through the southern wall here, clear the primary structure, locate Howe, and exfil to the landing zone here, Eastern Ridge, 1,500 meters from the compound. He turned to Cole, who was seated at the far end of the table with a notepad and a topographical map of his own that he'd already been marking up during the briefing. Cole, you're on Overwatch. This ridgeline. Dawson's pointer rested on a high feature 820 meters northwest of the compound. You'll have clean line of sight to the compound's northern approach, the main gate, and approximately 60% of the eastern perimeter. Your job is observation and reporting. You feed us real-time intelligence on personnel movement, guard rotations, anything that changes from the pre-mission imagery. You are not, I want to be absolutely clear about this, you are not to engage unless you are given an explicit green light by me personally. Are we understood? Understood, Chief, Cole said. Koa, who was seated to Cole's left, leaned slightly forward and looked at the ridgeline marking on the map. That position's isolated. If something goes wrong, he's on his own out there. No extraction contingency. He's aware, Dawson said, looking at Cole. Cole nodded calmly. I'm aware. Reeves, who had been quiet throughout most of the briefing, tapped his pen against the table. What's our current intel on enemy numbers at the compound? Dawson brought up another image. Last confirmed count from drone surveillance is between 12 and 15 personnel, armed, mix of small arms and at least 2 crew-served weapons positions here and here. He indicated 2 corners of the compound perimeter. However, and this is important, surveillance coverage has been intermittent due to weather and asset scheduling. There are gaps. We're working with incomplete information. That phrase, incomplete information, hung in the room with a weight that everyone felt but no one acknowledged aloud. Incomplete information was the operational reality of every mission like this. You never had the full picture. You moved on what you had, adapted to what you found, and you trusted the man next to you to do the same. The intelligence officer who had accompanied the briefing, a young woman named Captain Sarah Elliott, who spoke 4 languages and had probably forgotten more about the geopolitical complexity of the region than most people would ever know, added the final piece. The compound sits in a natural depression between 2 ridge systems. Acoustics in that valley are unusual. Gunfire echoes and distorts significantly. It's been noted in previous operations in similar terrain that personnel inside the compound have difficulty identifying the direction of incoming fire. That's relevant to your Overwatch position, Cole. If you have to engage, your location will be difficult to identify from the compound floor. Cole looked up from his notepad. How difficult? Significantly, she said. The last confirmed engagement in a valley with this profile showed a response time of 6 to 9 minutes before enemy forces could establish approximate firing direction. Cole wrote that down and underlined it. Dawson concluded the briefing with equipment checks, communication protocols, challenge and response codes, and the exfil helicopter call sign and frequencies. He walked around the table and distributed printed mission packages, laminated cards, small enough to fit in a chest pocket, containing only the most critical information in case of capture. As the team began to break from the table, running through their individual pre-mission checklists with the focused efficiency of men who had done this enough times that the routine was now a kind of armor against fear, Dawson paused beside Cole. "You've never fired in a combat environment," Dawson said. It wasn't a question. "No, Chief. It's different from the range. Everything you think you know gets stress-tested the moment the first shot goes downrange." Cole looked at him steadily. "I know that, Chief." Dawson studied him for a moment. There was something in the young man's eyes that was difficult to categorize, not arrogance, not bravado, but a kind of settled certainty that Dawson, in all his years, had seen in very few people. It was the look of someone who had already, in some private internal rehearsal, made peace with what was coming. "Get your gear squared away," Dawson said finally. "We move at 2200. Cole nodded and began folding his topographical map with clean, precise folds. Around him, 6 of the most experienced operators in the United States military were preparing for a mission that had been approved at the highest levels of the intelligence community, targeted an armed enemy force, and carried a risk profile that would have made most people's hands shake just reading it on paper. Cole's hands were completely steady. At 2200 hours, the base went quiet in the way that only happens when something serious is leaving. The helicopter, a modified MH-60M Black Hawk running without lights, lifted off from the eastern pad with the kind of muffled roar that the aircrew had spent considerable effort engineering. It crossed the perimeter wire and dropped immediately into a low-altitude flight profile that hugged the terrain, flying in the radar shadow of the ridge systems to the north, invisible to anything that wasn't directly overhead. Inside the aircraft, nobody talked. The team sat with their weapons across their laps, their night vision mounted but flipped up, their faces unreadable in the dim red interior lighting. Cole sat at the far end of the bench, his rifle case between his legs, his eyes half closed. Koa watched him from across the cabin for a moment, then looked away. He had expected the rookie to show something: nervousness, excitement, some crack in the facade. There was nothing. Either the kid had ice in his veins, or he hadn't yet understood what he was flying into. Koa wasn't sure which it was. The flight lasted 23 minutes. When the crew chief held up one finger 1 minute to insertion, the team came alive with a smooth, practiced efficiency that was almost beautiful to watch. Night vision flipped down. Weapons checked. Fast rope rigged at the door. Coal case opened. Rifle extracted and slung, case stowed behind his seat for recovery post-mission. He pulled his own night vision down, and the world turned to green-washed shadow. The helicopter flared and hovered 6 meters above a flat patch of ground between 2 rock formations. The fast rope dropped. Dawson went first, then Koa, then Reeves, then the other 3 operators in rapid sequence. Cole went last, gripping the rope and letting gravity do the work, his boots hitting the ground with a controlled thud before he released and stepped clear. The rope was recovered, and the Black Hawk was moving before Cole had taken his second step, pulling away into the dark, dropping back into its terrain-hugging profile, and disappearing as completely as if it had been absorbed by the night. Silence, then the wind and the distant sound of insects, and the crunch of boots on dry earth as the team moved into formation without a word being spoken. Cole's insertion point was separate. He had studied the terrain so thoroughly in the 12 hours before the mission that he could have navigated it with his eyes closed. He peeled off from the main element immediately, moving northeast while the team moved southeast, and within 30 seconds he was alone. There is a particular quality to alone that soldiers who have experienced it in hostile territory describe differently from civilians. It isn't loneliness. It isn't fear, necessarily. It is a heightened clarity, a state in which every sense sharpens to compensate for the absence of backup, in which the brain accelerates its threat processing because there is no one else to share the cognitive load. Cole had experienced this before in training exercises in remote terrain, and he had noticed then what he noticed now. He liked it. The quiet of it, the self-sufficiency of it, the way the world simplified into a single task with a single focus. He moved through the rocky terrain with his rifle held low and his night vision scanning constantly. The path to his overwatch position climbed sharply for the first 400 meters, then leveled across a narrow traverse before rising again to the ridge feature Dawson had designated on the map. Under normal conditions, a fit soldier carrying his load might cover this ground in 35 minutes. Cole covered it in 22, moving with a controlled speed that never sacrificed silence for pace. He reached the crest of the ridge and immediately dropped to a crawl, moving the last 15 meters on his elbows and knees across bare rock, keeping his silhouette below the ridge line. He found his position, a natural indent in the rock face that provided both concealment and a stable firing platform, and settled in. Below him, 820 meters away, the compound glowed faintly under a pair of exterior lights at the main gate. Through his Schmidt and Bender scope, Cole could see two guards at the gate, another on the northern wall, and the vague shapes of movement inside the courtyard. He dialed in his magnification, checked his ranging, and made his atmospheric adjustments with the quiet efficiency of someone running a calculation they had done 1,000 times. Wind from the northwest at 6 to 8 kilometers per hour, he estimated 7, applied the correction. Temperature, elevation, the Coriolis effect at this latitude, all of it processed and accounted for. He keyed his radio. Hound overwatch is set, 820 meters. I have eyes on 2 gate guards, 1 northern wall, possible 3 to 4 additional personnel in the courtyard. Wind northwest at 7. I'm stable. Dawson's voice came back immediately, low and controlled. Copy, overwatch. Team is 400 meters from the wire. Maintain observation and report any changes. Roger. Cole settled deeper into his position, his eye to the scope, his breathing slow. He began a systematic scan, north gate, courtyard, eastern perimeter, back to the gate, methodical and unhurried. He checked his watch. The team would be at the compound perimeter in approximately 11 minutes if they maintained pace. It was in the 7th minute of his scan, during a sweep of the western approach to the valley, that Cole saw something that stopped his breath for exactly 1 second. Movement. Multiple heat signatures, but he was working optical, not thermal, and the night vision was good but not perfect at distance. He held the scope steady, adjusting his focus, and waited for the shapes to resolve. They did. Armed men, moving in a careful tactical spread, not randomly, purposefully. They were not guards wandering. They were not personnel changing positions. They were moving on approach vectors that, when Cole traced them mentally against the compound layout and the team's last reported position, converged on exactly one thing. The SEAL team. He counted them twice, moving his scope across all 3 groups, his pulse entirely steady even as his brain processed what he was seeing. 10, 3 from the northeast, 4 from the south, 3 from the west, all armed, all moving with the quiet discipline of men who knew exactly where their target was. Cole keyed his radio. Hound, stop, do not move. His voice was calm and flat and precise. You have 10 tangos converging on your position, 3 northeast, 4 south, 3 west. They're approximately 400 meters from your current location and they're moving with purpose. This is an ambush setup. They know you're there. 3 seconds of silence, then Dawson's voice quieter than before. Confirmed 10. Confirmed 10. I have eyes on all 3 elements. They'll be in position around you in approximately 7 minutes. Another beat of silence. Cole could imagine Dawson in the dark below, running the calculation 6 operators, 4 of whom were currently exposed in open terrain, against 10 enemy fighters in a coordinated ambush, with a hostage to extract, a helicopter not yet on station, and no artillery support in range. The math was uncomfortable. Can you hold them, Overwatch? Cole looked through his scope at the 10 men moving through the dark valley below him. He measured distances. He calculated angles. He identified the order in which the targets would need to fall to prevent any single element from closing to engagement range with his team. He noted the acoustic properties of the valley, the way sound would bounce and distort, and thought about how to use that. He took one long, slow breath. "Give me the green light," he said. The silence that followed lasted 2 seconds. It felt like much longer. Then Dawson's voice came back, and there was something in it, not quite faith, not quite desperation, but something that lived in the space between the two. "Green light, rookie. Don't miss." Cole settled his cheek against the stock of his rifle, placed his finger along the trigger guard, not on it, not yet, and picked his first target. "Starting with the northeast element," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone on the radio. 3 targets, 860 meters. He breathed out slowly. And then he went to work. The first shot broke the silence of the valley like the world cracking open. Cole had selected the lead man of the northeast element as his first target, the one closest to achieving a position that would give his group a direct firing line on the SEAL team's right flank. At 860 meters on a moving target in crosswind conditions with a slight downhill angle, it was not what most snipers would describe as a comfortable shot. It was the kind of shot that, if you thought about it too long, you wouldn't take. Cole didn't think about it at all. He felt the wind, applied the correction, led the target by precisely the right margin, and pressed the trigger with the smooth, unhurried commitment of someone turning a key in a lock. The round covered the distance in just over a second. The target dropped. Cole was already cycling to his second target before the first man hit the ground. The northeast element had 3 personnel. Cole had arranged them in his mind by priority, closest to flanking position, then middle, then rear. He engaged the second man 7 seconds after the first. Different distance now, the group had continued moving, fractionally changing the geometry. Cole had already accounted for this. The adjustment was automatic, the kind of recalculation that happens below conscious thought when a shooter has internalized the physics completely enough that they become instinct. Second shot, second target down. In the valley below, something remarkable was happening. Or rather, something was remarkably not happening. The surviving personnel from the northeast element had gone to ground, but they were doing it in the wrong direction, scrambling for cover on the wrong side of the rocks, facing back toward the compound. The acoustic distortion that Captain Elliott had described in the briefing was working exactly as advertised. The crack of Cole's rifle and the supersonic snap of the rounds were bouncing off the valley walls in a way that made the sound appear to originate from multiple directions simultaneously, including from inside the compound itself. The enemy fighters didn't know where the shots were coming from. Cole didn't give them time to figure it out. Third shot. The final member of the northeast element went down behind a rock outcropping he had clearly believed was cover. From Cole's elevated position and angle, it was not. 3 targets, 3 shots. Elapsed time from the first shot, 41 seconds. On the radio, Dawson's voice. "Overwatch, confirm northeast element status." "Northeast is clear," Cole said. His breathing was unchanged. "Shifting to southern element, 4 targets, approximately 740 meters. They've gone static, they're looking for the shooter." "Copy, team is holding position. Move fast." Cole had already moved. Not physically, he had barely shifted his body, but his scope was sweeping south, acquiring the 4-man element that had been moving to cut off the team's southern approach. They had indeed gone static, pressing themselves against a low stone wall, facing back toward the compound. 3 of the 4 had their weapons trained on the compound's northern wall. They had convinced themselves that the fire was coming from inside. Cole felt something that he would later struggle to describe, not satisfaction, not excitement. It was more like the clean feeling of a well-solved problem. The kind of feeling you get when a complex equation resolves into something simple. He put the first of the southern element down with a shot that required a wind correction adjustment, because the valley's crosswind was accelerating through a narrow channel at this distance. He had anticipated the acceleration from his earlier observations and had already applied half a correction before the shot. Perfect impact. The remaining 3 men of the southern element broke from their position, a mistake, because moving made them visible, and because they were moving in the wrong direction, away from Cole's position and directly across his line of sight rather than away from it. Moving targets perpendicular to the shooter's position are actually easier to engage than stationary targets at the same distance, provided the shooter understands the geometry and the lead calculations. Cole understood them completely. He took the second southern target mid-stride, the third while the man was attempting to go prone. The fourth, the most difficult shot of this sequence, was a target who had managed to get into a shallow depression in the ground and was presenting only a partial exposure. Cole waited. 1 second. 2 seconds. The man shifted his position, exposing slightly more of his profile, and Cole put the round precisely where it needed to go. 7 targets down. Elapsed time from the first shot, 6 minutes and 12 seconds. On the ground, the 3-man Western element had heard everything and reached the right conclusion. There was a sniper somewhere on the high ground, but they had swept their eyes across the wrong ridgeline. They were watching a feature 200 meters north of Cole's actual position. He could see them scanning it through his scope, their heads turning, their weapons tracking across empty rock. Cole took a moment. His rifle temperature was within acceptable range. His position was still concealed. He did a quick mental inventory of his physical state, hands steady, vision clear, no tunnel vision, breathing controlled. Good. He keyed his radio. Hound, Western element, 3 targets, 900 meters, they're scanning the wrong ridge. I'm engaging now. Copy. The first of the Western element died looking at the wrong piece of high ground. The second dropped before he had processed what had happened to his partner. The third, and Cole would remember this one specifically, though he could never fully articulate why, turned in the exact right direction in the last moment. He looked up at Cole's ridgeline. He couldn't see Cole, no one could. The position was too well concealed, and the distance too great and the light too poor. But for a fraction of a second, he looked in exactly the right place, and Cole saw him do it. Cole pressed the trigger. 10 targets, 10 shots. Elapsed time, 17 minutes and 53 seconds. Just under 18 minutes. Cole held his position for a full 30 seconds, scanning the valley floor methodically, looking for any additional movement, any personnel he might have missed, any indication that more fighters were inbound. There was nothing. The valley was still. He keyed his radio, voice completely level. Hound, all 10 targets are down. Valley is clear. Your approach is open. There was a silence on the radio that lasted long enough that Cole wondered briefly if the communication had dropped. Then Dawson's voice came back. Just 3 words. Say that again, Overwatch. All 10 targets down. Valley is clear. Another pause, then, team is moving, continue observation. And then, after a beat that felt deliberate, outstanding work. Cole didn't respond to the compliment. He went back to scanning the valley, his eye steady at the scope, his finger resting outside the trigger guard, watching the approaches for anything that might threaten his team. Below, 6 operators began moving toward the compound. Part 5, the cleanup and the rescue. The SEAL team moved through the valley with renewed urgency, their pace faster now, the knowledge that the ambush had been neutralized translating directly into forward momentum. Dawson kept the team tight, 2 elements of 3, leapfrogging cover to cover with the kind of fluid precision that only comes from hundreds of hours of shared training. Koa on point, Reeves covering the rear, the other 3 operators holding the flanks. Cole watched all of it from his ridge, his scope following the team's movement, his radio open. He was now functioning as their eyes in every direction, scanning ahead of their movement, checking the compound perimeter for reaction to the sounds of the engagement, watching the distant tree line to the east for any indication of additional personnel. "Gate guards are still up," he reported. "Two at the gate, one on the northern wall. They're agitated, they heard the shots but they haven't identified direction. Northern wall guard is moving, he's going to the eastern corner. He'll have a sightline on your approach in approximately 45 seconds. Dawson's voice, "Can you handle the northern wall?" "Not on current assignment." "Wait," Cole calculated quickly. The northern wall guard had moved to a position that presented a direct threat to the team's breach point. Leaving him in position would compromise the insertion. "He's going to see your element. I'm requesting weapons free on the wall guard." "A beat, weapons free, northern wall only." Cole took the shot. The wall guard went down quietly. From inside the compound at this distance and with the acoustic distortion, it would have sounded like a clap of distant thunder. The gate guards looked up at the sky. The SEAL team reached the southern wall of the compound 17 minutes after Cole had cleared the valley. What happened inside the compound over the next 15 minutes was largely beyond Cole's observation. He could track the gate guards, watch the perimeter, and listen to the terse radio traffic that told the story in fragments. A brief burst of suppressed fire from inside. A shout in a foreign language cut short. Dawson's voice calling room clear, then another voice calling clear, then silence, then, "We have Howe, he's ambulatory, we're moving." Captain Daniel Howe, 37 years old, Defense Intelligence Agency, had been in that compound for 48 hours. He walked out of it under his own power, supported by Koa's massive frame, moving toward the extraction point at a pace that was slower than the team wanted but faster than a man in his condition had any right to manage. Cole tracked their movement from the ridge, providing continuous observation. "Eastern approach is clear. No movement on the ridgeline to your right. You have open ground to the LZ. Copy, Overwatch. Begin your movement to the alternate extraction point." Cole began breaking down his position. He cleared his brass, every casing accounted for, everything that had come in with him going out with him, collapsed his bipod, secured his rifle, and began moving along the ridge toward the alternate extraction point 2 kilometers north. He moved quickly now, no longer concerned with maintaining the hide, focused entirely on reaching the LZ before the helicopter. He made it in 19 minutes. The helicopter was 4 minutes behind him. When the Black Hawk settled onto the flat ground of the eastern ridge and the team came in from the south, Howe between Koa and Reeves, Dawson last, Cole was already crouched at the edge of the LZ, scanning the surrounding terrain. The team loaded fast and professional. Howe was helped aboard. Operators stacked in. Dawson was last, and as he stepped past Cole to board the aircraft, he stopped. He looked at the young man, the rookie who had arrived 24 hours ago in a strange base and been given a cot in the corner, and looked at with the mild indifference that veterans reserve for people they don't yet believe in. Dawson put his hand on Cole's shoulder. It was a grip, not a pat, not a gesture. A grip, firm and deliberate, the kind of contact that men who work in places where words are inadequate use to communicate the things that language can't carry. He held it for 3 seconds. Then he released, turned, and boarded the aircraft. Cole climbed in last, pulled the door, and the helicopter lifted off the ridge and banked north into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying 7 operators, 1 rescued intelligence officer, and a 22-year-old sniper who had just done something that nobody in that aircraft had believed was possible 24 hours ago. Howe, pale and bruised but conscious, looked across the cabin at Cole. Nobody had introduced them. Howe didn't know who Cole was or what he had done specifically, but something about the way the operators were sitting relative to this young man, the subtle spatial language of elite soldiers who unconsciously orient themselves toward the person they respect most in a given room, told Howe something important. He caught Cole's eye. Cole nodded once. Howe nodded back. The Black Hawk dropped into the valley and ran for home. The base at 0400 in the morning has a specific quality that anyone who has ever served in a combat zone will recognize immediately. The generators still hum. The lights in the operations center are still on. The night shift personnel move with the quiet efficiency of people who have learned to function in the strange suspended hours between midnight and dawn. But when a mission returns, when the vehicles roll back through the gate or the helicopter settles onto the pad, there is a shift in the atmosphere that everyone on the base feels without being able to explain it. Something was out there. Now it's back. The math of who left and who returned happens instantly and unconsciously in the mind of every person on base who sees them come in. The Black Hawk touched down at 0357. The medical team was waiting for Hal, a standing protocol for any recovered personnel. He was met at the aircraft door, assessed quickly, and moved toward the medical facility while still trying to look back at the men who had pulled him out, as though he needed one more look to confirm that they were real. The operators moved to the operations building for immediate debrief. Cole followed. He had cleaned his rifle during the flight home, field strip and reassembly by touch in the dark interior of the helicopter, an act that had drawn a quiet look from Reeves, who had watched the process with something that was beginning to look a great deal like respect. The debrief room was small and brightly lit. An intelligence officer Cole hadn't seen before was present along with Dawson, the team, and a senior NCO from the base command element. The mission was laid out methodically: timeline, objectives achieved, personnel status, incident report. When it came to the Overwatch engagement, Dawson presented it with the same flat, factual brevity with which he presented every other element of the mission. Overwatch identified a 10-man ambush element at approximately T+7 minutes from insertion. Overwatch was given green light for engagement. All 10 targets were neutralized. Mission was able to proceed. The intelligence officer looked up from his notepad. How long did the engagement take? Dawson glanced at Cole. Cole said, 17 minutes and 53 seconds from first shot to last. A silence settled over the room that was different from the operational silences Cole had been navigating all night. This one had a quality of processing to it, people recalibrating something. 10 targets, the intelligence officer said slowly, in under 18 minutes, alone, at that range. Yes, Cole said. Moving targets. Some were static by the time I engaged them. 3 were moving. The officer looked at Dawson. Dawson's expression was unreadable. The officer looked back at Cole. And your brass? Recovered all of it. The debrief continued, but Cole could feel something shifting in the room. Not dramatically, there were no congratulations, no applause, no movie moment. This was a military debrief, and military debriefs are not built for epiphany. But the texture of the room had changed. The way people looked at him, including the operators who had spent the previous day treating him as furniture, was different. Reeves, who had called him son, with barely concealed condescension 24 hours ago, was now sitting with his forearms on the table, and his eyes on Cole with an expression that belonged to someone who has encountered something he needs to rethink. Koa, who had not spoken directly to Cole once since his arrival, caught his eye across the table when the debrief concluded and gave him a slow, single nod. In Koa's economy of expression, this was a significant statement. After the debrief, Cole cleaned his rifle properly. Full detail clean this time, every component broken down, inspected, and reassembled in the methodical ritual that serious marksmen use to process their thoughts as much as to maintain their equipment. He was alone in the gear room when Dawson came in and sat on a crate across from him. How long have you been shooting? Dawson asked. Since I was 8, Cole said, running a cleaning rod through the barrel. My grandfather, he was Army, Vietnam. He believed that a man who could shoot could always find a way to be useful. He paused, examined the patch on the rod. He also believed that if you're going to do something, there's no point in doing it halfway. Dawson was quiet for a moment. Were you scared out there? Cole considered the question with genuine seriousness, the way he considered everything. Not the way people describe being scared. My heart rate was elevated. I was aware of the risk, but the fear didn't get into the mechanics. It stayed outside them. Dawson nodded slowly. That's what separates most people from. He let the sentence trail off, then started it differently. There are men who have been doing this for 15 years who can't keep fear out of the mechanics. You understand that? I'm beginning to, Cole said. Dawson stood. He looked at Cole for a long moment with those pale gray eyes that missed very little. Get some sleep. We'll talk about next steps when command weighs in. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Your grandfather, is he still alive? No, Cole said. He passed when I was 17. I'm sorry. He knew what I was going to be, Cole said simply, setting the barrel aside and picking up the bolt carrier group. He told me once. He said, Ethan, you've got the gift. Don't waste it on anything small. A pause. I've been trying to figure out what that meant ever since. Dawson looked at him for one more second, then left. Cole finished cleaning his rifle, reassembled it, ran his function check, and set it against the wall. Then he walked to his cot, lay down without removing his boots, and was asleep in approximately 90 seconds. Part 7. The debrief that spread through the base. In the military, information moves through two channels simultaneously and at very different speeds. The official channel, classified reports, after-action reviews, formal communications, moves with procedural deliberateness, filtered and formatted and reviewed before it travels. The unofficial channel, word of mouth, the low conversation between soldiers in chow halls and vehicle bays and smoke pits, moves at the speed of human curiosity, which is to say almost instantly. By 0800 the morning after the mission, the unofficial channel had already carried the basic shape of what had happened to every corner of the forward operating base. The details were imprecise in the way that rapidly transmitted stories always are, but the core of it, a rookie sniper, alone, 18 minutes, 10 targets, 0 misses, was accurate in every version, because those numbers were too specific and too dramatic to be distorted by transmission. The official channel caught up by 1000 hours. The base commander, Colonel Richard Farris, was a lean, gray-haired man of 53 who had spent his career in special forces and had the particular quality of stillness that long exposure to extreme situations tends to produce. He reviewed the after-action report from Dawson with a cup of coffee in one hand and the kind of focused attention he brought to everything. When he reached the section on the Overwatch engagement, he read it twice. Then he pulled up Cole's personnel file on his terminal and read that as well. He spent a long time looking at the marksmanship qualification data. Then he reached for his telephone. The call he made was to the senior sniper instructor at the Joint Special Operations Command Training Pipeline, a master sergeant named Tolliver who had been training special operations snipers for 11 years and had forgotten more about long-range precision shooting than most people would ever know. Farris read him the engagement data over a secure line, distances, target count, elapsed time, conditions, the number of rounds expended. There was a silence on Tolliver's end of the line. Say that again, sir, Tolliver said. The rounds expended. 10, Farris said. Another silence, and the time. 17 minutes and 53 seconds. On a first deployment, Tolliver said, it wasn't a question. It was the sound of a man recalibrating something fundamental. On a first deployment, Farris confirmed. Sir, I need to see the shot data. Logging data from the rifle system, environmental conditions, everything. It's being compiled. You'll have it by end of day. When the shot data arrived at Tolliver's office, he spent 4 hours going through it. He ran the wind calculations independently. He checked the estimated target distances against the topographical data. He modeled the acoustic conditions in the valley using the coordinates and the atmospheric data from the night in question. Everything Cole had done checked out. Every shot made sense when you traced the decision-making behind it, but the speed at which those decisions had been made, and the consistency of their execution under combat stress on a first deployment, was what made Tolliver sit back in his chair and stare at the ceiling. He sent Ferris a written assessment the following morning. The relevant line read, "In 11 years of training precision shooters for special operations roles, I have reviewed numerous exceptional performances. The performance documented in this report from PFC Cole's first combat deployment is, in my professional assessment, without precedent at this career stage. The technical execution is extraordinary. The psychological stability under first combat conditions is rarer still." On the base, Cole was largely unaware of the formal review happening above him. He spent the day in the way he spent most days, cleaning his gear, reviewing topographical maps of the operational area, eating his meals without particular notice of what they tasted like, and reading. Reeves found him at the range that afternoon, working slow-fire drills at a target he'd set up at 400 meters. Reeves watched him shoot for a few minutes without saying anything. Cole was aware of him but didn't acknowledge his presence until he'd completed the string of fire. Then he set the rifle safe, turned, and waited. "I owe you an apology," Reeves said. He said it like a man who doesn't apologize often and therefore makes it count when he does. "The way I spoke to you when you came in, that was wrong." Cole looked at him. "You didn't know me." "No, but that's not really the point, is it? You don't disrespect a man because you don't know him yet." Cole considered this. Apology accepted. Reeves nodded. Then, with the awkward sincerity of a man who was trying to express something larger than his vocabulary was readily equipped for, "What you did out there, I've been doing this for 9 years. I've worked with some of the best shooters in the world. What you did at that distance, that count, that fast on your first time out," he stopped, tried again. "I just need you to know that I know what that was, and I won't forget it." Cole picked up his rifle and began the process of safe clearing. "My grandfather used to say that the only competition worth having is with yourself, whether you were better today than yesterday." He checked the chamber one final time, confirmed clear. "Last night I was." Koa appeared from the direction of the operations building and walked across the range with the unhurried movement of a very large man who has never felt the need to rush. He stopped beside Cole, looked downrange at the target, then looked at Cole. "You're on the team now," Koa said. "For real." It was from Koa a speech. Cole nodded once and went back to his drills. 3 weeks after the mission, a formal commendation was entered into Ethan Cole's service record. It was written in the dry, precise language that the military uses for such documents, technical, factual, stripped of anything that might sound like enthusiasm. It documented the date, the operational context, the number of targets engaged, the elapsed time, and the outcome. It used words like decisive, precise, and critical to mission success. It did not use words like extraordinary or unprecedented, because military commendations are written by people trained to resist superlatives. What the document could not capture, what no document could capture, was what happened to Ethan Cole's reputation in the weeks and months that followed. Reputation in special operations communities doesn't travel through formal channels. It travels the way all truly important information travels, which is through people, in conversation, in the deliberate way that serious practitioners of a craft discuss someone who has done something that resets their understanding of what is possible. Cole's name started at the base. Then it moved to the training community, carried by Tolliver's assessment and the word of the operators who had been on the ground that night. Then it reached the wider special operations network, the loose, informal web of experienced soldiers and intelligence personnel who had worked in the same operational spaces for years, and who traded information about personnel the way collectors trade information about rare things. The story was always told the same way because the facts didn't need embellishment. 10 targets, alone, 18 minutes, first deployment, no misses. The people who heard it and had enough experience to understand what it meant would pause at the end of it, the way Tolliver had paused, and recalibrate something. 6 months after the mission, Cole was offered a slot in the Special Operations Forces selection process. He passed selection with what his evaluators would later describe, in the careful language of people who don't readily hand out praise, as a notably high score across all categories. He was assigned to a unit. He deployed again and again. Over the following 2 years, Ethan Cole built a record that, when reviewed in its entirety, had a cumulative effect similar to the first mission, the sense of encountering something that exceeded the normal parameters. He was not reckless. He was not loud. He did not seek recognition or position himself for advancement. He simply showed up, performed at an extraordinary level, and went home. The consistency of it was, in some ways, more striking than any individual performance. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Dawson, who had returned to his regular operational cycle, would be asked about Cole periodically by people who had heard the story and wanted to know more. Dawson was not a man who spoke freely about operations or personnel, and his assessments of people were always measured. But when asked about Cole specifically, he said something that was eventually repeated enough times that it became part of the story itself. "The rookie saved every one of us that night," Dawson said, in the low, declarative tone of a man stating a fact that requires no amplification. "He didn't freeze. He didn't rush. He just worked. I've been doing this a long time, and I've never seen a man work like that under those conditions on his first time out. There's a difference between being trained to do something and being built for it. Cole is built for it." Captain Daniel Howe recovered and debriefed and returned to his work at the Defense Intelligence Agency, wrote a personal letter that went through proper channels and was placed in Cole's file alongside the formal commendation. It was 3 paragraphs long. The relevant portion stated that he had been informed of the specific circumstances of his rescue, including the actions taken by the Overwatch element, and that he wanted it on record that he understood precisely what had been done for him and that he did not take it lightly. The final line of the letter read, "Whoever he is, whatever he goes on to do, make sure he knows that his work that night mattered to more than just me. I have a daughter. I went home to her. That's because of him." Cole was shown the letter by his commanding officer. He read it twice, carefully, folded it along its original creases, and handed it back. He said nothing, but his commanding officer, watching him, thought he saw something move through the young man's eyes, not pride exactly, but something quieter and deeper. The confirmation of something, the sense of a thing understood at last. His grandfather had told him not to waste the gift on anything small. He hadn't. Ethan Cole continued to serve. The missions that came after were classified and will remain so. But in the specific world of people who understand what precision shooting means under combat conditions, who understand what it costs a human nervous system to perform at that level in the dark on a first deployment, his name carries a specific weight. Not the weight of fame. He has no public profile, no book deal, no documentary. The weight of a thing that people in a particular community know is real and rare, and worth knowing about. There is a ridgeline in a valley whose name and location will never appear in any public document. The rock face there still bears the faint impression of where a young man settled into a natural indent in the stone, calibrated his rifle against a 7 km/h crosswind, and did something that nobody who was there that night had believed was possible. The valley doesn't know what happened in it. The wind doesn't remember the shots. But the men who were on the ground below that ridge, the operators who had dismissed the rookie with their silence and their indifference, remember every second of it. They remember the sound of each shot echoing through the dark valley, clean and precise, arriving one after another with the quiet inevitability of something that could not have happened any other way. They remember counting. And they remember what it felt like when the counting stopped and the valley went silent and the radio crackled, and a young man's voice came through, completely level, completely calm, as though he had merely finished a thing that needed finishing, and said, All 10 targets are down. Valley is clear.